I used to think the worst thing that could happen with a roommate was arguing over dirty dishes or late rent payments. I had no idea someone could slowly take over your home, turn your life upside down, and convince everyone around you that you were the villain while they destroyed everything you worked for. By the time I realized what Brock and Sienna were really doing, I had already lost my apartment, my job, and almost every person I trusted. I had been living with Brock for a little over a year in a two-bedroom apartment on the north side of the city. When we first moved in together, things were actually great. We split everything evenly: rent, utilities, groceries, sometimes cleaning supplies. Brock was easygoing, and for a long time, I genuinely considered him one of my closest friends. We watched football together on weekends, ordered takeout after work, and never had serious problems. It felt stable, which mattered because I was already stretched thin financially. I worked full-time at a logistics company and lived paycheck to paycheck most months, but at least I had consistency. Everything started changing when Brock began dating Sienna. At first, I liked her well enough. She was attractive, confident, and outgoing in a way that made people instantly trust her. She started coming over a few nights a week, which seemed completely normal. I never complained. I figured that was part of having a roommate. But then a few nights became every night. Her makeup and skincare products slowly took over our bathroom counter. Her shoes appeared near the front door. Packages with her name started arriving at our apartment almost daily. One afternoon, I opened the fridge and realized half the shelves were filled with her groceries. 3 months passed, and she never went home. The apartment stopped feeling like mine. I would come home from work and find her sitting at the kitchen table on video calls because she worked remotely. The television was always on. The air conditioning ran nonstop because she liked the apartment freezing cold even in mild weather. The electric bill jumped from around $80 to almost $140. Water usage shot up too. Brock and I had always split utilities evenly, but now I was basically paying for a third adult without anyone even acknowledging it. I tried hinting about it casually at first. I would joke about how our electric bill suddenly looked like we were running a nightclub. Brock always laughed it off. Sienna would smile like she had no idea what I meant. Every time I thought about bringing it up seriously, I felt guilty, like maybe I was overreacting. But I could feel resentment building inside me every single day. I was working overtime just to survive, while someone else lived in my apartment rent-free. One evening I sat down and spread our utility bills across my bed. I highlighted the increases with a yellow marker and calculated how much extra money I had paid over those 3 months. Seeing the numbers written down made my stomach tighten. I could not afford this anymore. I finally decided I needed to stop avoiding the conversation and handle it directly like an adult. A few days later, Sienna left for a yoga class, and I asked Brock if we could talk. We sat at the kitchen table where we had eaten hundreds of meals together over the past year. I remember feeling nervous even though I should not have been. My voice stayed calm as I explained everything. I told him I understood wanting his girlfriend around, but she had basically moved in, and the bills were getting out of control. I told him it was not fair for me to financially support another person without any discussion. To my surprise, Brock immediately looked guilty. He rubbed the back of his neck and nodded slowly while listening. He admitted he had not realized how much it was affecting me financially. He even apologized. That honestly caught me off guard because I had prepared myself for an argument. Instead, he said I was right and promised he would talk to Sienna about contributing financially or spending more time at her own place. For the first time in weeks, I felt hopeful. Over the next several days, Sienna was suddenly around less often. Instead of staying 7 nights a week, she only came by 2 or 3 times. The apartment felt peaceful again. Brock even sent me a text message thanking me for being patient with them while they worked things out. When he paid utilities that month, he added an extra $20 without me asking. It felt like a peace offering. I remember staring at my phone thinking maybe I had misjudged the situation. Maybe this was just a temporary rough patch between roommates. Then everything exploded. The following Thursday, I got home from work around 6 in the evening. The second I opened the apartment door, I knew something was wrong. Brock and Sienna were sitting stiffly at the kitchen table, both dressed strangely formal. But what really made my stomach drop was the man sitting across from them in a dark suit with a briefcase open beside him. Papers were spread neatly across the table like some kind of business meeting. Brock looked at me with absolutely no warmth in his eyes. It was like I was staring at a stranger wearing my roommate's face. "This is Harrison," he said flatly. "He is our attorney." I actually laughed at first because I thought it had to be some kind of joke. Then Harrison adjusted his glasses, folded his hands, and started speaking in this cold, professional tone that made my chest tighten instantly. He explained that Sienna had legally established residency in the apartment because she had been living there continuously for more than 60 days. According to him, she now had full tenant protections under state law. I remember blinking at him in confusion, trying to process what he was saying. I told him she was not on the lease and did not pay rent. Harrison calmly replied that payment was not required to establish tenancy rights in our state. He said duration of stay was what mattered legally. Then he slid a stack of papers toward me. My stomach dropped when I realized they were screenshots of my text messages with Brock. Messages where I complained about Sienna living there full-time. Messages where I said she needed to contribute financially or stay elsewhere more often. Certain phrases were highlighted in yellow like evidence in a criminal case. Harrison claimed my behavior constituted harassment toward a legal tenant. He said my repeated requests for Sienna to leave created a hostile living environment. I felt my face getting hot with disbelief. I tried explaining that I was simply asking for fairness because I could not afford to support another person. Harrison barely reacted. He just kept speaking in that emotionless legal voice while pushing another document across the table. It was a notice giving me 30 days to vacate the apartment voluntarily. I stared at the paper in complete shock. I told them they could not evict me because I was literally on the lease and had never missed rent. Brock leaned back in his chair and casually said he was the primary leaseholder and had authority over the apartment. The way he said it made me feel physically sick. Just a week earlier, he had been apologizing and thanking me for being understanding. Now he was trying to throw me out of my own home. That night, I barely slept. I sat on my bed with my laptop open, desperately searching for answers online. Every legal website I found talked about landlords and tenants, but almost nothing explained situations involving roommates trying to force each other out. My mind kept racing in circles. I had maybe $800 in savings. Rent prices in the city were insane. First month, last month, and security deposits alone would bankrupt me. Around 2 in the morning, buried deep inside some tenant rights forum, I found a comment from someone claiming lease modifications usually required signatures from all leaseholders, not just the primary one. I screenshot it instantly like I had discovered buried treasure. It was the first tiny spark of hope I had felt all night. The next morning, I called out sick from work because I genuinely could not function. I spent hours contacting free legal aid clinics. Most had waiting lists, several weeks long. Others said my income barely exceeded qualification limits. One office told me they only handled domestic violence cases now because they were overwhelmed. By noon, I felt completely hopeless. Then one paralegal I spoke to stayed on the phone with me a little longer than she probably should have. She quietly admitted my situation sounded suspicious and gave me the names of 3 attorneys who specialized in housing disputes. 2 never worked out, but the third office scheduled me for a consultation the next afternoon. The consultation fee alone was $200, which honestly made me nauseous because I could barely spare it. I spent the entire night organizing documents. Lease copies, utility bills, screenshots of texts, bank records showing every rent payment I had made. I walked into attorney Craig Monahan's office the next day feeling like my entire future depended on whatever he said. Craig spent about 10 minutes silently reviewing everything while I sat there sweating through my shirt. Finally, he looked up and tapped the lease agreement with his finger. He explained that Brock absolutely could not remove me from the lease without my consent or a legitimate court order because our contract required signatures from both tenants for any modifications or termination. I almost cried from relief. Then Craig explained the problem. Brock could still attempt formal eviction proceedings, and I needed to file legal responses correctly to protect myself. His retainer fee was $5,000 upfront. The number hit me like a punch to the chest. Craig could tell immediately that I did not have that kind of money. He gently suggested I could try filing paperwork myself, but warned that housing court was complicated and mistakes could seriously hurt my case. I left his office carrying legal forms that looked like they were written in another language. 3 days later, things got even worse. I came home from work planning to continue researching my case online, but the Wi-Fi password suddenly no longer worked. At first, I assumed there was a technical problem. Then I asked Brock about it, and he casually told me I was no longer entitled to household amenities since I would be leaving soon anyway. The cruelty in his voice stunned me. I ended up driving to the public library with my laptop and paperwork. A librarian noticed me struggling with the court website and kindly helped me scan documents and upload everything correctly. When I finally submitted my response forms online, I felt this tiny flicker of control returning to my life. At least I was fighting back. That feeling lasted less than 24 hours. The next morning, my supervisor called me into her office at work. Someone from HR was already waiting inside. The second I saw both of them sitting there, my stomach dropped. My supervisor explained they had received a complaint accusing me of stalking and harassing a former resident from my apartment complex. She slid printed screenshots across the desk. My phone number appeared at the top of every image. The messages included threats like "you will regret this" and "I am not letting this go." I stared at them in horror because I had never sent those texts in my life. I tried explaining they were fake, that someone had fabricated them somehow, but neither of them looked convinced. HR told me the company took harassment allegations seriously and could not risk keeping someone accused of threatening behavior. Before I fully understood what was happening, security was escorting me out of the building carrying a cardboard box with my desk belongings. I sat in my car afterward shaking so badly I could barely hold the steering wheel. Then it hit me, Sienna. There was no doubt in my mind anymore. She had either created fake screenshots or somehow manipulated old conversations to make me look dangerous. They were not just trying to remove me from the apartment anymore. They were systematically destroying my life. That evening I finally called my parents because I did not know what else to do. I explained everything through tears. The eviction threat, the fake attorney, losing my job because of fabricated messages. I expected sympathy or concern. Instead, my father sighed heavily and told me they had already spoken to Brock. Apparently Brock had contacted them days earlier and painted himself as the reasonable victim dealing with an unstable roommate. He claimed I was harassing Sienna because I could not accept that she lived there now. My mother got on the phone sounding deeply disappointed. She told me they raised me better than to intimidate women. I felt physically sick listening to them repeat Brock's version of events back to me. Then my mother mentioned seeing the threatening text screenshots. The exact same fake messages that got me fired. My own parents believed them. By the end of the call, my father informed me they would not help financially unless I apologized and got my behavior under control. When the call ended, I just sat alone in my car outside a coffee shop staring at the dashboard while everything inside me collapsed. The following week became pure survival mode. I filed for unemployment, though I doubted I would even qualify after being terminated for misconduct allegations. I started buying the cheapest food possible: instant noodles, bread, peanut butter. My credit card balance climbed higher every day. Back at the apartment, Brock and Sienna acted like I did not exist. They laughed together on the couch while I silently packed pieces of my life into boxes. I started selling everything I could: my gaming console, my bike, old electronics, textbooks, anything with value. One night, an old coworker named Hank messaged me after seeing my marketplace listings online. He asked if everything was okay. I ended up telling him the entire story through Messenger, expecting skepticism or awkward silence. Instead, Hank immediately believed me. He connected me with a temp agency that placed workers into short-term jobs with daily pay. Within days, I was working exhausting random shifts all over the city. Warehouse loading one day, overnight retail stocking another, data entry assignments whenever they appeared. The pay barely covered food and transportation, but it kept me from completely drowning. One afternoon after a warehouse shift, I came home earlier than expected because the assignment ended ahead of schedule. As soon as I walked into the apartment, I heard Brock and Sienna talking in the kitchen. They did not realize I was there yet. Sienna was laughing. Then I heard something that made my blood run cold. She joked about how easy it had been to fake the screenshots because most employers never investigate deeply once harassment accusations appear. Brock laughed too and said I folded faster than he expected. I froze in the hallway listening. Sienna bragged about how convincing Harrison looked in the suit even though he was actually her cousin who worked in insurance sales, not law. My entire body went numb hearing that. The attorney had been fake the entire time. I quietly pulled out my phone and started recording audio. They kept talking for several minutes, completely unaware. Brock admitted he wanted me gone because Sienna planned to officially move in, but neither of them could afford the apartment alone without forcing me out first. Sienna joked that emotionally breaking someone down was easier than legal battles. I remember standing there barely breathing while recording every word. That recording changed everything. The next morning, I emailed copies to myself, uploaded backups online, and sent one to Craig Monahan's office asking if he would at least review it. A few hours later, Craig personally called me. For the first time since meeting him, he sounded genuinely shocked. He told me the fake attorney stunt alone could carry serious legal consequences depending on how Harrison represented himself. The fabricated harassment evidence and coordinated intimidation campaign made things even worse. Craig agreed to take my case with a smaller upfront payment after hearing the recording. Over the next several weeks, everything turned into chaos. Craig filed motions challenging Brock's claims and submitted the audio evidence. My former employer reopened their internal investigation after receiving formal notice that the harassment accusations may have been fabricated. Apparently, companies become very interested when lawsuits involving false evidence enter the picture. Then the real explosion happened. Harrison was not licensed to practice law at all. During a hearing, Craig exposed that he never formally identified himself as an attorney on paper, but Brock and Sienna absolutely presented him that way intentionally during our meeting. The judge looked furious after hearing the recording. Once pressure mounted, everything started unraveling for them quickly. My employer's tech department discovered inconsistencies in the screenshots used against me. Metadata showed the images had been edited before submission. Brock panicked and tried blaming everything on Sienna. Sienna blamed Harrison. Harrison suddenly stopped answering everyone's calls. Within another month, my termination was reversed. The company offered reinstatement after determining the evidence against me was unreliable. My supervisor personally apologized, though the damage to my reputation still lingered. The housing case ended even more dramatically. The judge ruled Brock had acted in bad faith by attempting coercive removal tactics instead of following legitimate lease procedures. Because of the harassment campaign and deliberate intimidation, Brock ended up violating multiple tenant protection rules himself. Ironically, the person closest to actual eviction by the end was him. Sienna moved out before the final ruling even happened. Brock barely looked at me the last time I saw him. He stood in the apartment surrounded by half-packed boxes while movers carried furniture downstairs. The same apartment he tried to steal from me suddenly looked empty and lifeless. I expected to feel victorious, but mostly I just felt exhausted. The hardest part was my parents. Even after everything came out, they struggled to admit they had believed strangers over their own son. My mother cried when she finally saw proof the screenshots were fake. My father apologized quietly over dinner one night without really meeting my eyes. We repaired things slowly, but something between us permanently changed after that. I eventually moved out of the apartment anyway because I could not stand living there anymore. Every corner reminded me of months spent feeling trapped, paranoid, and powerless. I found a tiny studio across town that cost more than I wanted to pay, but when I locked the door that first night, I felt safer than I had in a long time. What still haunts me is how close they came to succeeding. If I had not overheard that conversation by accident, my entire life probably would have collapsed completely. I would have carried an eviction record, lost my career permanently, and maybe even lost relationships with everyone I cared about because two people decided I was easier to destroy than confront honestly. Now, whenever people talk casually about roommates moving partners in temporarily, I immediately think about Brock and Sienna. I think about how quickly your home can stop feeling safe. I think about how terrifying it is when someone calmly weaponizes lies while smiling directly at your face. And most of all, I think about how dangerous it is when the people trying to ruin your life sound reasonable enough that everyone believes them before they ever hear your side.